To welcome the players of Team Canada 1972, please take your seats. Okay, this is kind of is my pleasure today to welcome to the House of Commons players and representatives of the Team Canada Team 1972. I will ask members to hold their applause until I have the names of our guests. I'm wondering if I even need to go through this because everybody knows exactly who you are, but I'm going to take it from the top if everyone can hold back. Don Ari. Yvan Cournoyer. Yvan Cournoyer. The Honourable Ken Dryden. Ron Ellis. For Victor Hadfield, who was not able to attend, his son, Jeff Hadfield. Paul Henderson. Dennis Hull. The Honourable Frank Mahovlich. Peter Mahovlich. Serge Savard. Robert Sealing. And the late Bill White, represented by his son, Cam White. I will now invite the Right Honourable Prime Minister to make a statement to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Summit Series.
Mr. Speaker, everyone loves a good comeback story, especially one that united our whole country. Quite frankly, the level of unanimity in this House today is a nice thing to see, too. 50 years ago, before the Summit Series had even started, a lot of sports writers and hockey fans were predicting an easy win for Team Canada. At the time, a journalist of the Globe and Mail famously promised that if the Soviets won a single game, he would eat his own column shredded in a bowl of borscht. Well, it didn't take long for him to eat his words literally. There's even a picture of it.
On September 2nd, 1972, the first match took place in the Montreal Forum. Canada lost that game 7-3. In the days and weeks that followed, our team experienced ups and downs. After a loss in the 5th game in Moscow, we were up against the wall. If we wanted to win the series, we had to win the last 3 games in a row. It was quite a challenge. But the players kept practicing, the coaches refined their strategy, and Canadians didn't lose hope.
Game 6. After a scoreless first period, Canada finally produces a 3-2 victory. Game 7, Phil Esposito scores the first 2 goals, and Canada wins 4-3. And then, Game 8. Dernier match de la série.
The last game of the series, there is 1 minute left to play, and the score is 5-5. That's when Paul Henderson jumps on the ice.
Henderson rushes to the net. He falls. He gets back up. Team Canada takes 2 rebound shots, and with 34 seconds to go, Henderson flips in a shot to the goalie's left. You could hear the cheers from coast to coast to coast. Everyone remembers where they are. Everyone except me, because I was only 9 months old. But I remember growing up with players like Yvan Cournoyer and Ken Dryden as heroes. I'm even wearing my Habs socks today. They weren't only heroes because they had won the series. They were all heroes because they taught us a lesson. They showed us how grit and hard work pays off. They showed us that even when there's only 34 seconds left to play, you never give up. And in a global example, they showed us that having a hard-fought competition on ice can go a long way, even for diplomacy. Mr. Speaker, Paul Henderson once told the story of a friend calling him when the Berlin Wall fell, saying that after his famous goal in '72, the Soviets probably never recovered. Now, I will let experts debate on whether there's any truth to that, but what is absolutely true is that the Summit Series was a defining moment in the history of our country. Hear, hear. Monsieur le Président, en 1972,
Mr. Speaker, in 1972, our national flag was only 7 years old. At the time, it was not a flag that everyone agreed with. But as Serge Savard has often pointed out, after our players won and after wearing the maple leaf on their jerseys, Canadians became proud of this symbol that still represents them today. It is a symbol of peace, democracy, and freedom.
Our world is a different place today than it was during the Cold War, Mr. Speaker. But there are parallels, and one thing remains the same. We will never stop fighting for what is right. Today, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Summit Series and all the members of this historic team, let's remember the best of who we are as Canadians. Let's continue our work to make sure people, young and old, players and fans, can be part of this extraordinary sport in a safe and respectful environment. Let's keep reminding the world that being polite and friendly never precludes us also being tough and determined. And let's remember that with hope and hard work, there's nothing we can't overcome. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, friends.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
It is an honor to welcome to the House today the legendary heroes of the Summit Series.
Members of the Team Canada from at the 50-year anniversary of their victory at over the Soviet national team in the '72 Summit Series. 1972 was the year that the Cold War spilled into the world of sports. In July, American and world chess champion Bobby Fischer had defeated the Soviet champion and #2 world competitor Boris Spassky. And in the Munich Olympics, the American basketball team had lost a bitter and still contested gold medal game against the Soviet Union. But neither of these events produced such drama or lasting glory as the Summit Series. The series pitted, for the first time, the best Canadian professionals, although some of them look too young to have been there, against the Soviet players who were at the time underestimated, but preparing quietly for a surprise. It was to be the true test of hockey supremacy, played under the shadow of a much deadlier contest for global supremacy. The Canadian Ministry of External Affairs suggested that the encounter could be called a friendship series. Thank goodness the players ignored that and had the good sense to compete fiercely. Although most commentators and most Canadians expected the series to be an easy one, after a shocking 7-3 loss in Game 1 in Montreal, it became clear that the series would not be a friendly exhibition of Canada's superiority. As the losses mounted, the pressure on our players grew, the low point being the series' Game 4 in Vancouver, when some of the crowd rained boos down on their defeated heroes. Canadians simply couldn't understand how these NHL All-Stars, these legendary names that they knew so well, could be outscored by a team of Russian amateurs. The Canadian fans had not yet realized what had become clear to the Canadian players. These Russians were actually really good. They were playing a different game than the NHLers were used to. A game of speed and finesse, long lead breakout passes, and pinpoint cross-ice accuracy. By the end of the series, the names of those faceless Russians would be household names in Canada. We know them now, we knew them then, and now many of them play in the leagues on this side of the ocean, or at least their children and grandchildren now do. Names and faces that Canadians would come to know and respect in international tournaments and exhibitions pitting Soviets against NHL competitors. By the time the Canadian team left to train in Europe ahead of the 4 games in Moscow, the idea of a friendship series was long dead. From this side of the Cold War, knowing how it ends, we can afford to look back objectively. But in the moment and at the time, the series had become, to borrow the name of the 40th anniversary documentary, The Cold War on Ice. The 72 series was the first time the term Team Canada was applied to a Canadian hockey team. In the minds of Canadians and fans following the series around the world, and on both sides of the Iron Curtain, Team Canada versus Team Russia had become us versus them. 2 styles, 2 different ways of life, 2 fundamentally incompatible ideologies and system of government. Democracy versus totalitarianism, communism versus free enterprise, freedom versus repression. Cliches never tell the whole story, but they often tell the most important part. This is true of the stories we are told today of the 72 series. Before the series, we told ourselves that we were the best hockey country in the world, and that our way of playing was the only way to play properly. During the series, we realized that this wasn't quite true. For having lost those 4 games, and having seen the competitive grit and the finesse of a team of a different style, we learned that we needed to up our game. In the last game on home ice, the frustration of Canadian fans in Vancouver's Pacific Coliseum erupted as boos rained down from the bleachers. Team Canada lost, falling 4-2. In a now iconic post-game interview, the legendary Phil Esposito pleaded with Canadians. To quote the elder Esposito brother, he said, "I am completely disappointed. I can't believe it. Some of our guys are really, really down in the dumps. We know, we're trying. They got a good team. Let's face the facts. But it doesn't mean we're not giving 150%, because we are. Every one of us, every one of the guys, 35 guys that came out and played for Team Canada, we did it because we love our country." But on foreign ice, in front of hostile fans, with their backs against the wall, down 2 games, Team Canada rallied to win the last 3 games, each by a single goal. Each of those winning goals was scored by the great Paul Henderson. His name is immortalized in Frank Hewitt's frantic play-by-play call that erupted through thousands, actually hundreds of thousands and probably millions of televisions and radios in classrooms and workplaces across the country. Henderson has scored, and the crowd goes wild, of course. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience would not have been so pleased, of course, but those here on the other side of the world would have applauded and cheered with such a vibrating and powerful force that it would have been heard all around the globe. It's a call that still thrills us all half a century later, even those of us who were born after 1972, who have only heard the echo of those cheers, still revel in the legacy that they represent. When we hear those calls and we see those names, the names that are here today, Yvan Cournoyer, after the winning goal, for example, it takes us back to a different time and a different world. It was 17 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Just a few months before the wall fell, in May of 1989, a 20-year-old Alexander Mogilny would become the first Soviet star to defect to the West to play in the NHL. He was charged with deserting the Soviet Red Army, in which he was nominally an officer. Shortly after that, a crumbling and cash-strapped Soviet hockey system and Soviet Union would come crashing down as well. 2 years after that, in 1991, the Soviet Union, which in 1972 had appeared almost invincible, officially came to an end. I say almost invincible because this Team Canada showed that they were anything but. That is something that the Canadian spirit brings alive in hockey, but also in all aspects of our lives. I think what is so special about the gentlemen gathered here today is that every single Canadian can see their own triumph in this legendary win. You've made us all proud. You've given us one of the defining moments of Canadian history. In fact, I think if any Canadian were asked to close their eyes and dream up the most Canadian moment, it would be hard to think of anything more Canadian than the 72 Summit Series victory. And so on behalf of all Canadians, I wish you a great congratulations, and I thank you for your contribution to our national story, and may we all live up to your incredible example of grit and determination and victory. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, gentlemen, I'm the only leader in the House to have worn skates before 1972. With very little success, well, here I am today. The Bloc Quebecois has always defended the Quebec identity. Quebec and Canada are two different nations with different values and often different ways of doing things. We defend the right to live in French, the common and official language of the Quebec nation. Sometimes in hockey locker rooms, we do not recognize ourselves in multiculturalism. The British monarchy? Well, let's not even talk about the British monarchy. We only like dynasties when they're hockey dynasties. We have the civil code, we like clean energy, we are attached to secularism. We are two different nations, but we sometimes hold hands from time to time. We sometimes share interests and visions. Canada and Quebec are peaceful. We prefer peace to war, dialogue to the use of weapons. We are Democrats. We are concerned about poverty, injustice, and violence, and we seek solutions to improve people's lives. Frankly, I believe that Canadians and Quebecers are a good bunch. And above all, what we share, Canadians and Quebecers, is the unshakable conviction that hockey is the greatest sport in the world. From Toe Blake to Maurice Richard to Sidney Crosby and Marc-André Fleury, not to mention, of course, by the huge Guy Lafleur, Mike Bossy and Doug Gilmour, Canadians and Quebecers are, without a shadow of a doubt, and we're talking just among ourselves, I don't want to seem pretentious, but I'm pretty sure we have the best players in the world. Well, maybe. I'll be so bold as to say that Quebecers have the best players in the world, but let's just share for one day. We know how to play hockey here in Canada. Well, you know how to play hockey. In my childhood, and in the childhood of hundreds of thousands of Quebecers my age, Guy Lafleur scored a Ville. Then someone made a save. It was Ken Dryden. Ken Dryden, one of the names that made young people dream. And when we say that we have the best players in the world, nothing shows it better than the Summit Series. On the one side, we, embodied by these gentlemen we have the honor of hosting today. On the other side, the Soviet superpower. This at the height of the Cold War. With the nuclear threat and the fear of a Third World War hanging overhead, the best of us and the best of them faced off on the ice. Pete and Frank Mahovlich. I haven't said these names in a while. Mahovlich, Guy Lapointe, Yvan, Cournoyer, Serge Savas, Ken Dryden, Phil Antonio Esposito, Bobby Clark, Rock Gilbert, just to name a few. And believe me, it is not for lack of admiration that I'm not naming the whole team. On the other side, the Soviet Union, the enemy of the Western Bloc. Those on the other side of the Iron Curtain. They could not lose, but they did. We could only win, and we won. Absolutely magical. The Summit Series symbolizes so many things. First of all, it is better to fight on the ice with a puck and sticks than on a battlefield. And in that regard, it might be a good idea for Mr. Putin to drop Ukraine and settle with us in a 4 of 7. Secondly, the Summit Series reminds us that the Soviets were not only enemies. We had opponents that we could, and above all, should respect. And this is an extraordinary contribution of sport to the détente and the eventual end of the Cold War. A stone of the Berlin Wall undoubtedly fell with the Summit Series. Finally, Mr. Speaker, Paul Henderson's goal. Paul Henderson scoring the greatest grinder goal in history. There's Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. There's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And then there's Paul Henderson's goal. My honourable colleague for Abitibi-Témiscamingue has suggested a 21st century series where Quebec would play against Canada. A national team against a national team. Well, in friendship, of course. But there will always be things from time to time that we all like and want to do together, and that is the reason for which 50 years later we are here to say bravo and thank you. Thank you for the dreams, and thank you for proving that if you are determined enough and courageous enough, you can achieve miracles. Thank you, gentlemen. The honourable member for Algoma Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud to rise today to honour the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Summit Series and the team members that captured the hearts, minds and imaginations of an entire nation. It is that rare event in sport that had every Canadian on the edge of their seat and would become legend across the nation, creating role models, inspiring songs, and establishing Canada as the dominant hockey nation on earth.
This series was so iconic that it has virtually no rival in terms of its significance to this nation, other than Terry Fox's Marathon for Hope, and it far surpasses such historic moments in Canadian sports, such as the Blue Jays' back-to-back championships, Donovan Bailey's gold medal sprint, and Sidney Crosby's golden goal at the Vancouver Olympics. Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by thanking all the players of the 1972 Team Canada for their historic victory in the Canada-Russia series, including the many players who have joined us today to celebrate the 50th anniversary.
Mr. Speaker, in case you didn't know, a good lot of the players originated from Northern Ontario. The Esposito brothers, Phil and Tony, learned to play in Sault Ste. Marie. Brothers Frank and Peter Mahovlich were from Schumacher. I was told not Timmins, but Schumacher. Mickey Redmond called Kirkland Lake home. Gary Bergman hailed from Kenora. And I also want to give a special shout out to the late, great Jean-Paul J.P. Parizet, the hard-working left-winger from Smooth Rock Falls in my riding of Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing, who scored 2 goals, 2 assists, and had the single most controversial moment in the series. But more on that in a minute. The series is often spoken of as a parable of the Cold War these days, but I doubt that anyone playing in the series was thinking of that. The players went out there for 8 games, and through grit and determination brought this historic win home for our great nation. They inspired a generation of young people to embrace hockey and did so much to establish it as Canada's national sport, to the extent that this House legally declared it as such in 1994. It's the historic moments that will be remembered forever across Canada. To quote commentator Foster Hewitt's play-by-play at the end of Game 8 of the series, "Cournoyer has it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it and fell. Here's another shot right in front. They score! Henderson has scored for Canada!" Mr. Speaker, Paul Henderson's iconic Game 8 winning goal, often called the goal of the century, will always live on as part of the Canadian psyche. Phil Esposito's 7 goals and 6 assists set the pace for the entire series. And of course, J.P. Pariset's frustration at the officiating in Game 8 that got him ejected for game misconduct, which is often cited as the turning point that led to less questionable calls on the ice and strengthened the rest of the team's resolve.
I'm proud to say that following a recent dedication, Pariset's name is permanently commemorated by a sign in his hometown of Smooth Rock Falls, thanks to the suggestion of Johnny Lemieux and the support of the town council. They wanted to ensure that the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Summit Series was well marked, also as a tribute to Mr. Pariset. Mr. Speaker, Pariset was thrilled to be selected to represent Canada on the world stage, but he was so respected in the National Hockey League that he was asked to play for Team Canada as a surprise pick. He went on to have an exemplary hockey career, playing 890 games in the National Hockey League, including 2 All-Star games. He never won the Stanley Cup, but his widow, Donna, said how much winning gold for Canada meant to him.
Mr. Speaker, I hope I was properly able to convey just how important this event was for the history of our nation. To quote the lyrics of another Canadian legend, and I'm not going to sing them because I can't do justice. Maybe the member for Timmins J. Bisbay would have been able to do it, but not me. So from the tragically hip singer Gord Downie, if there's a goal that everyone remembers, it was back in old 72. We all squeezed the stick and we all pulled the trigger. And all I remember is sitting beside you. So, Mr. Speaker, I've also been lobbied by my colleague, the MP for Windsor West, to put in a selfless plug on having the member from the team, Paul Henderson, to be inducted in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I was pleased to do that. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your attention. And more importantly, I thank Team Canada from 1972 for all they have done for this country.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much has been said already about the Summit Series win, and to be honest, I was born more than a decade after you won. And so I think I'll share more about the legacy that you left us. The first being this idea of a best-on-best tournament. If it wasn't for you at the Summit Series, would we ever have seen Gretzky pass to Lemieux to win the 1987 Canada Cup? Would we ever have seen Sid the Kid at the time score the golden goal in Vancouver 2010. That's part of the legacy that you all left for us. It's also in you all as players across the country that bring us such pride. And as we heard for Northern Ontario, I'll offer the same plug for Waterloo Region. The late Bill Goldsworthy from Waterloo, Rod Sealing from Elmira, and Don Ari from Kitchener. You make us all proud. And last, of course, Mr. Paul Henderson. Not just the last goal, the game-winning goal in 6, 7, and 8. And not just as a player, as a minister, as a motivational speaker, and as an author. Many Canadians have had the honor to meet Mr. Henderson over the years. In my case, I had that chance many years ago, introduced by his niece as Uncle Paul. What I remember most is how kind, gracious, and humble he was. In fact, he might be the only person in this country who doesn't think he belongs in the Hockey Hall of Fame. You brought together this country back in 1972, and you brought together this house in a spirit of unity today. Your legacy. Thank you for bringing pride to our country then and now. Thank you.
Honourable colleagues, distinguished guests, hockey fans, and hockey legends. Le dernier mot, je l'ai gardé pour moi.
I wanted to take the floor last.
Every baby boomer remembers that long day ago. Today's school children could not even imagine the excitement their grandparents felt about watching television during the school day at school. A few young people today would hardly recognize the then cutting-edge technology, this massive box-like TV that were dragged into the classrooms and into the libraries so that we could all watch the game. Our excitement was all about the game, our game, Canada's game. Et pour plusieurs,
And for many, the result of this match between Canada and the former USSR also had a geopolitical importance that was more nuanced, more complex. But everyone throughout the country knew that we were living through historic moments. It was also a moment of inspiration. How many new players, be they boys or girls, put on skates for the first time after Paul Henderson's winning goal at the last minute of the game?
Sporting events make magic when they bring people together. And all of you made magic on the ice all those years ago. For that, we're all very grateful. It's now my pleasure to invite all honourable members to meet our special guests in the Speaker's dining room, located behind the chamber in room 233S. I look forward to seeing you. Au plaisir de vous accueillir.
Looking forward to seeing you in the Speaker's dining room in 233S West Block for a reception just after the rising of the plenary committee.
Very much. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech. Le comité s'adjourne maintenant.
The committee will now adjourn.